Instead of creating slides for you, I decided to work for 5 years and present a book. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you, all that. I think we're really at a crossroads. I've been on this topic since post-credit crisis, just before credit crisis, actually. And through a student her name is Victoria Blakanova, Dr. Victoria Blakanova, who's now in charge of short-term debt research, repos, and financial stability at the OFR, which is a creature that was created out of Dodd-Frank and now the largest think tank on the planet on capital markets. I helped her along with her PhD, and the product of that is the creation of this book, which is entitled, funny enough, it's sort of an anagram of that one, Money Market Funds in the EU and the US Regulation and Practice. The way we looked at this, and this might be instructive for the officials here that are looking for data or trying to structure data, we took a very simple cut. We looked at US law, and then we looked at EU law, and we looked at how that was actually being implemented, how practitioners were getting the message or not getting the message, and then we provided our ifs, ands, and doubts about going forward. Just a few points in terms of principle, and then maybe a few comments about what I've heard so far with our marvelous speakers. First of all, we're dealing in an area that's regulation. That means that we should presume there's something called the law. And if we presume that there's something called the law, I think we should also be very in favor of what I would call legal distinctions. And if we forget what certain legal distinctions are, we can go awry incredibly quickly and make all kinds of what I would consider vain comments about what we can and cannot do without having the cognizance of what those legal distinctions actually are. For example, a primary legal distinction is between debt and equity. We have to kind of figure that from the very beginning what those types of risks really mean. And if we don't have that in our hearts, when we start to prescribe what are essentially debt instruments, we could create a field of uncertainty for which there need not be. So in the creation of money market fund regulations, we have a very huge regulation from the United States that's basically rewritten a major portion of Rule 2A7, which has held us steady through many a time in the United States. And I just want to make a few factual comments on the history of Rule 2A7 and how it was created and how it was actually taken up in the United States, because it may actually be an interesting fact pattern for where we are now in Europe. Europe tends to have this notion of protecting its asset managers and its banks, and forgets, as me being very hard as an American, that there are these people called investors that have free will, and they wish to have their own self-determination. So if we reel back history a bit, and we look at the creation of money market fund regulations, it was interesting. Because you could look at that history and you could say, and this is hand on my heart, that money market funds were the first financial instruments ever created in the history of humanity that were democratically elected financial instruments. What do I mean by that? I mean, that's a very serious statement. It wasn't just set by some elitists up on the top. It was a set of regulations that had to actually be, in a sense, voted on in every state of the Union. All 50 states had to agree. And there were battles up and down the United States to get this particular set of rules passed. That history is marvelously recounted by a mate of mine, Mr. Matt Fink, who was head of a mutual fund association president for 35 years. The other thing that Matt Fink tells us in his recounting of history is something that I think is very peculiar to the United States, but you could transfer this particular set of facts to Europe at this moment. So what are those particular set of facts? Well, the money market funds have been taken up by retail investors. And after about a year and a half, someone came up with a bright idea. I don't want to say which fund, but there's a person in this room who's actually part of that, that fund, came up with a brilliant idea that money market funds could be sold as a convenience, not as an investment. I'm going to make this very straight with you, but as a convenience, straight up convenience, not like a Rolls Royce going down the road and showing everyone how much money you've made. No, this is like a little rotor-rooter that actually did the job, transported the money when it needed to be transported, actually did the job. What do I mean by did the job? Well, if you were someone inside a big company, big institution, you had a lot of form filling to do with all the assets that you own. So this bright little spark said, you don't have to fill out all those forms. You can fill out one form. Invest in the money market fund. And so it grew, and it doubled in size within a year. So I wanted to recount this little bit of history to you because as you're trying to decide on things like financial stability, or I would say, let's be reasonable here, because on the one hand you have an accounting kind of number versus a systemic risk, multidimensional type conclusion that you need to make, and somehow you have to pin the donkey. You have to connect the dots between what you presume is cause and what you really believe is effect. And I don't think anyone seriously thinks those two things can be put together as cause and effect. You have to be very serious about this. And if you are market-oriented, you do want your money market funds to grow in Europe, you need to kind of understand, as some of the people here have stated, that there are exigencies in business. There are things that need to be done on the basis, really primarily for convenience. Parking your money is a really serious convenience. So if the rules that you decide to go for are a little bit ahead of the game, I dare say they're a little bit too mature for what the industry is now, then you know that you might be doing something you really don't want to do in Europe. I think you're at this period in time in Europe where you would like your money market funds to grow. You have huge potential. So I'd encourage you to look at your rules again and make a distinction, we say in the law, between the de jure and the de facto. Whatever the de jure is, those are your rules and regulations as they're set in so 800 amendments, goodness, versus the de facto. Simple life. What does the treasurer need? What does the asset manager need? What does the investor need? All of them need, and this is really the final message from me to you, or Victoria and myself to you, is that those investors need to freely decide. So what they need most, above everything else, is transparency. If they could decide, if they base their decisions on transparency, you have a supply and demand function. You have an Akerlof Part 2 of his beautiful 1970 paper. You actually have a meeting of the minds under the law, and you have potentially the production of a blossoming money market fund. Thank you. And, oh yeah, Victoria says that if you wish, please give me your business card. We'll send you a little missive, little promo on our book. And she also wants to collect data in Europe. Thanks very much.